Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us again today here at Life Fellowship Frederick, especially for this worksheet portion of what we're doing. This is going to be, I think, extremely valuable to those who take the time to participate, because our focus for the next probably couple weeks will be in Romans chapter 14, probably in the chapter 15 a little bit, as we prepare our church to negotiate the reconvening process together. As I've mentioned before, that this is one of the more polarizing topics that we face as a church. And in Romans 14 and 15 gives us a template not for what to do, but how to consider our interaction with one another as we have varying opinions on what aren't black and white doctrinal issues. And so, but there's context to this, and Paul immediately jumps into the context of Romans 14 with the assumption that the people know what he's referring to. However, I don't think most believers today do understand that. And so I will give you a heads up to parents with small children. You can go as far as you can on the front page with them, but don't get bogged down on the first page. Really, the second page would probably be the easiest to negotiate as a family with young kids. But regardless, I'm going to go through both front and back page now with you to give some context of why we're doing what we're doing. So what we're dealing with is issues, we're dealing with in Romans 14 is issues that exist between Jewish and Gentile believers in the church. And we start to see that God began to reveal himself to the people of Israel in the Old Testament. And so the Jewish folks have one perspective on how things should be done, and the Gentiles have a very radically different perspective on how things should be done at church. And so Paul's addressing these folks very specifically. So we're going to start off with a template of the Jewish mindset. What the scriptures reveal to us about God's plan, what shapes the Jewish mindset of the Christian church in the early ages of the church. And so I want you to familiarize yourself with the themes of these following passages, if possible. The first is Genesis 17, verses 10 through 14. That's also echoed in Leviticus 12, verses 1 through 3. Exodus 23, 14 through 19. Exodus 35, 1 through 3. Leviticus 11 and Leviticus 17. And I say familiarize yourself. You don't have to read through all of it, just kind of get an idea. Even if you read the headers at the top, if you have an NIV, it'll give you a good enough understanding of what we're talking about. These become relevant points to what we're discussing in the book of Romans. Now we're going to start to look at the dispute that starts to emerge, and the first time we see it coming to a head. It became so necessary that Paul and Barnabas brought to the elders and to the apostles in the church in Jerusalem this matter of the synchronization, I guess you would say, of the Jewish and Gentile believers. The Jews think there should be one standard. The Gentiles disagree with that. It's a massive issue. In Acts chapter 15, verses 1 through 31, there's the entire story. If you don't have time to read the entire story or the bandwidth with little ones, you could read Acts 15, 1 and 2, verses 6 through 11, and 19 through 21. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for you younger families. There are some key truths, however, that are found in verses 10 and 11 of Acts chapter 15. And so in the midst of everything we're doing, I'd like you to stop and just record the simple and profound truths that are found there in those verses. The next question is that the apostles, all of whom are Jewish, by the way, all the apostles, selected 4 directives to send back to the Gentile churches all across the country, and even around the world as far as we know. I want you to identify those 4 directives and then give some thought as to why they may have selected those 4 things. This isn't a trick question, and that's written on your sheet. This is just to get you engaged. Of all the things they could have chosen, why those 4? Finally, 3 of these directives are largely irrelevant today. I think they had a great cultural context then. As we'll be doing in our Sunday morning series, we'll be looking at the relevancy from a thematic standpoint as opposed to the specifics of what's directed. The bottom line is there's 3 of these elements that are largely irrelevant today. So if you were an apostle today, or if you were to expect a letter from the apostles today, what do you think, keeping in lines of what the apostles were trying to communicate back in those days, how they would look at the church of the world today, and what 3 issues would they add to this? This is another hypothetical exercise, but one designed to engage us in the process of thinking like the apostles did back then. Moving on to page 2. We're going to dive into the entire text. We have Romans 14, verses 1 through 12 printed out for you. And in order to help us to negotiate the passage today in the sermon format, I'd like you to start off by marking every command that is found in this particular passage. Then I want you to mark every reference to the word Lord, or God, or Christ, or Master. This should be a fun task for the kids to do. And then I want you to try to summarize in just a couple bullet points what the main issue that Paul is addressing here in these 12 verses. And then finally, as we put the pieces together, kind of wrapping our brains around all of this, what do you think leads to the discrepancy in beliefs and practices within a Christian church at this time? How could it rise to a level of being disputed is really what it comes down to. And I pray this is a blessed time for you and for your family. And I look forward to answering some of these questions, maybe even raising more in the sermon format. God bless you guys.